Big thanks to Rob Dyke for joining me in narrating this video.
Number 15. Jeremy spoke in class today. American rock band Pearl Jam has a major fan favorite in the song Jeremy. Not many people know its dark meaning and the fact it is based on not one, but two tragic true stories. Jeremy Dele, a 15-year-old attending Richardson High School, was described as a quiet and melancholic teen. Unknown to his classmates and the staff, Dele had been suffering from major depression, which caused him to slip in his grades and face detention countless times. One day, Dele showed up to class late and was told by the teacher to get a late slip. When Dele returned, he had a revolver in his hand, which he promptly placed in his mouth and fired. Nobody had time to react, and it is likely Dele was killed instantly. A fellow classmate described Dele as kind and said the two would pass notes back and forth to each other during their time in school suspension. Pearl Jam singer Eddie Vedder read an article about the story and was moved to write the song. He stated years later he also had inspiration from a personal experience during his school days. A fellow classmate of his had brought a gun to school and began shooting in his oceanography classroom. While Vedder was not in the room at the time, he said he heard the shots and later found out the classmate was an individual whom he'd clashed with many times. As for Dele, his memory is forever within the lyrics of Jeremy, so now his voice can be heard.
Number 14. Schoolyard possession. Demonic possession is a scary but popular topic since it piques much interest. In most cases, there is one possession which usually sparks controversy, but Elsa Para Flores School in Peru saw the idea of possession happen tenfold. In May of 2016, around 20 girls attending the school began suffering bizarre symptoms, including convulsions, vomiting, fainting spells, and even foaming at the mouth. All the sufferers talked about seeing a tall man wearing black stalking them, even though no one fitting that description was around. All the girls aged between 11 and 14 were rushed to a hospital, with trucks being used to transport them quickly. A further 80 to 100 students have since suffered the same symptoms and have been rushed to the hospital. The school believes it is a series of demonic possessions from malevolent forces living in the school. Experts believe the children are either suffering the effects of some sort of drug or even a type of mold known to cause hallucinations and severe sickness. The same mold is theorized to be the cause of the claims of witchcraft in New England in the early settled days of America. The story continues to expand, and until this source is figured out, it appears Flores School will continue to be plagued by the contagious demonic possession.
Number 13. The Mystery of Kendrick Johnson. A case which has caused much controversy is made even more tragic since it happened at school during class hours. Kendrick Johnson was a basketball player at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, and was considered by peers to be very talented in the sport. On January 11, 2013, staff and students were shocked when Johnson's body was found in a rolled-up gym mat. An initial autopsy revealed Johnson had suffocated, leading investigators to believe he had climbed in to retrieve something and got stuck, unable to breathe. However, the family refused this explanation and ordered another autopsy to be conducted. This time, signs of blunt force trauma to the head were discovered, and the case became a homicide investigation. However, the case has since stood still, and no suspects have been named. Johnson's family have accused the school board and police of orchestrating a cover-up, which both institutes deny. As of 2016, there is an ongoing wrongful death suit of $100 million, which is still awaiting judgment. Whatever happened to Johnson in that gym is left to speculation, with some stating it was a freak accident and others saying it was a racially motivated homicide.
Number 12. The Noose Incident. Racism is not isolated to one region of the world and unfortunately encompasses a vast geological landscape. In the South Shore of Nova Scotia, Canada, a rather disturbing case angered people across the country. In May 2016, a series of racial-motivated incidents began to occur, mostly the raising of Confederate flags by students. The most horrific and disgusting was when an African-American teacher arrived at school to find a noose hanging over his desk. CBC News managed to dig into the case and found the racially charged incidents had been occurring since early 2015, but the school board has remained quiet and they are trying to deal with the situation. So far, the motivation behind the incidents is unknown, apart from purely discriminatory behavior. After an investigation by the school board, the student involved in the news incident was identified and disciplined, although they have refused to comment on what was done as punishment. Hopefully, this will be the end of the South Shore racist incidents, and maybe the world can eventually put racism behind them.
Number 11. Playground of Blood. For many children, recess was something they all looked forward to. The well-needed break during the school day was in order to get their energy going and keep them from becoming drained during their studies. However, a school in Sydney, Australia got a massive shock when the recess bell rang. Children rushed out into the field only to find the cubby house was covered in what appeared to be blood. Police arrived on the scene and it was revealed more than 30 centimeters of blood covered the entire cubby house. At first believing it to be a sick prank using red food coloring or animals' blood, forensics testing proved the blood indeed belonged to a human being. More tragic is the blood appeared to be that of a male child. Police immediately opened a homicide investigation and are still searching for answers. However, there has so far been no DNA matches to any unsolved cases, leading many to believe there could be a small child out there still undiscovered. As of 2016, the case remains open but has gone cold due to the lack of significant evidence to provide a lead, leaving police and the community both scratching their heads and mourning the possible loss of an infant, the identity of whom we may never know.
Number 10. The untimely death of Dominic Gallegos. Children in elementary love to be physically active and long for recess and gym. Sadly, it can lead to unforeseen consequences. Dominic Gallegos was outside during gym class playing soccer when he collided with another kid. While everyone expected him to brush it off and get back up, other children reported he was not getting up and was unconscious. Gallegos was rushed to a hospital, where he was unfortunately pronounced dead. Police came to the hospital, but it was determined there were no signs of foul play and his death was caused by a freak accident. The school staff and students were devastated. It was later determined when Gallegos had fallen, another student had stomped on his chest twice, at which point he fell unconscious. The boy who did so is known to have bullied Gallegos countless times in the past, and Gallegos' family sought some sort of justice for their son. However, an autopsy revealed Gallegos had an undiagnosed enlarged heart, and no further trauma was found to his body. It was officially determined to be a freak accident from an undiagnosed medical condition, and no one was held accountable for Gallegos' untimely passing.
Number 9. The Lakewood Incident. It's no secret that people in high school begin to feel a range of emotions as their bodies mature. Sadly, this can lead to extremely malicious crimes. Lakewood, California is a city within Los Angeles County. In the early 1990s, a group of high school boys decided to hold a competition to see which of them could have sex with the most girls. They dubbed themselves the Spur Posse after their favorite basketball team, the San Antonio Spurs. Soon, their antics became out of hand, and there was wide accusation of some of the teens raping girls in order to gain a lead in the competition. By 1993, LA County sheriffs caught wind of the incidents and began an investigation. Several of the Spur Posse were arrested on March 18th, and they became known across the nation. All but one of the boys were released after detectives found their sexual encounters had been consensual, but one teen was kept under statutory rape charges after it was found he had sex with girls as young as 10 years old. A victim testified she found one of the teens at her window and he demanded sex, which she obliged out of fear of rumors that the boys harmed girls, who declined. After the case was closed, the boys continued to be infamous and made appearances on tabloid talk shows across the country. The case remains controversial, and activists today use it as an example of why sexual offenders should receive harsher sentences for their crimes.
Number 8. Pocatello High School's eerie residents. Pocatello is a quiet city in southern Idaho, best known by the outside world for having its flag voted the worst flag in North America. However, paranormal enthusiasts know the city for the haunted Pocatello High School. Constructed in 1892, the school has a long history and rumors of violence and foul play during its existence. The most infamous incident at the school was when two students, Brian Draper and Tori Adam Kick, murdered their classmate Cassie Jo Studdard. The high school itself is said to be home to several ghosts, with students witnessing strange apparitions and security footage capturing several entities after the doors are locked. It is not officially known who these spirits are, but there are stories of students committing suicide during school hours in the mid-20th century. The school even burned down in 1914, but people are still searching for answers in hopes of helping the spirits come to rest.
Number 7. Virginia Tech's second tragedy. The moment someone mentions Virginia Tech, we almost always remember the tragic April day when a gunman killed 32 students before turning the gun on himself. To this day, it remains the worst school shooting in American history. Sadly, this wasn't the end of Virginia Tech's string of tragedies. Chinese student Xin Yang arrived to begin her studies and reached out to fellow Chinese as she was alone in the country. She attended events and social gatherings with various other international students and quickly found people she considered friends. In January 2009, she befriended 25-year-old Haiyang Zhu, but this would prove to be fatal. In a shocking and horrific act, Zhu beheaded Yang with a kitchen knife in a campus coffee shop before a crowd of stunned onlookers. His motives remain unknown, as witnesses say they appeared to be smiling, and no argument had taken place between them prior to the event. People who know Zhu described him as charming and kind, which leaves even more questions unanswered. Zhu was taken into custody within minutes of the murder, and he was charged with first-degree murder. As if things couldn't possibly get worse, just under 3 years later, gunshots once again rang out on the campus, and police found 2 dead in a parking lot. An officer had made a routine stop when he was shot several times and killed. An investigation later revealed the second body belonged to the shooter, and he had shot himself. Virginia Tech has remained strong through these strings of bad luck, and the campus appears to have been pulled closer together as a community.
Number 6. The Watcher in the Ceiling. A former student of Westland High School in Oregon had a truly scary experience to recall on Reddit of a close encounter with a ghost. During his freshman year, the student known as Jack asked to use the restroom during class and made his way down the hall. While walking, he felt a cold breeze move past him, and his hair began to stand on end. He ignored the feeling and entered the restroom. As he was sitting in one of the stalls, he heard a knock on the stall door. He said it was occupied, but there was no answer. As he was about to brush it off again, he realized no one was in the bathroom, as he had not heard the doors open or seen feet in front of the stall. He then heard bumps coming from the ceiling and looked up, where a large hole was above him. To his horror, he saw a figure staring down at him emotionless. Despite shaking with fear, he managed to snap a photo before running to the nearby janitor's office. He said there was someone in the ceiling and showed them the photo. Police were called to search the building, but they found nobody there. Jack's photo is enough to give viewers chills of their own, as the figure appears to have no facial features except for the outline of a nose, ears, and where eyes should be. Apart from that, it is completely white but still looks menacing. No updates from Jack have appeared since, and it is unknown if the figure was an actual person or a spirit long forgotten.
Number 5. The Steubenville Tragedy. By far one of the most notorious and well-known occurrences on this list, Steubenville is located in eastern Ohio. Residents, as well as the entire country, were rocked by a horrific crime in August of 2012. In the late hours of the 11th, a local high school girl, who has not been identified, was intoxicated while several of her peers sexually assaulted her. Several of the participants documented their acts through photos and videos taken from their cell phones and later bragged about the acts on social media. However, 2 of the prime suspects, Trent Mays and Malik Richmond, who were the star football players on the school team, orchestrated a cover-up in an attempt to get away with it, but by then, word had spread. Ohio authorities obtained evidence from cell phones of those present and hundreds of texts between students discussing what had happened. The victim stated she had no memory of the events, but awoke in a basement completely naked, surrounded by Mays, Richmond, and another boy. Mays and Richmond were arrested and charged with sexual assault, and both received a 1-year sentence. Mays was released in January of 2015, while Richmond was released 1 year previously. The case has caused much outcry against rape culture, and many have said the boys' punishment was far too light. When sentenced, the boys cried, saying nobody would want them anymore, but the public didn't seem to have much sympathy.
Number 4, Canada's residential schools. When it comes to the dark shadows on a nation's history, there are usually enough to fill volumes of books. In Canada, the residential schools have painted a bloody history on Canada's relations with its First Nations communities. Known officially as the Canadian Indian Residential Schools, these institutions were administered by various Christian churches throughout Canada. Their objectives was to remove members of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis and assimilate them into Canadian society. Throughout Canadian history, roughly 30% of Native children were forced to attend residential schools and were subjected to appalling treatment. Students were forced to speak English, participate in Christian prayers, and various menial tasks such as cleaning the halls. If they refused or made mistakes, they would be punished by whipping and sometimes isolation for long periods of time. The students lived on campus in overcrowded dorms that were not properly heated and had poor sanitation. Many did not survive their stays, and the majority who did survive suffered severe psychological issues after, leading to alcoholism and even suicide. Sexual abuse was also highly present within the schools by staff. More shocking is the last residential school closed in 1996, over 100 years after they opened and decades after the conditions were discovered, albeit the conditions were dramatically improved by then. Today, the Canadian government has made efforts to reconcile with the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee actively working with the different bands. In June 2008, then Prime Minister Stephen Harper issued a formal apology on behalf of the Canadian government, and since then the government is working to help improve the quality of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, although it still meets with controversy to this day.
Number 3. The tragic case of Trevor Veronez. School resource officers have to deal with a variety of things on school grounds, from locker searches to fights to simply having a sense of security for the school. Officer Marcus Rhodes unfortunately had to have a rather traumatic experience in October of 2009. Student Trevor Veronez, who suffered mild autism, brandished a knife and attacked Rhodes, stabbing him several times. Rhodes had no choice but to shoot Veronez several times, killing him. This left the school and community in shock as people attempted to understand what went wrong. Witnesses claim that Veronez was a well-mannered student and very kind, but on this day was threatening to commit suicide for reasons unknown. Rhodes stepped in to calm him down, at which point Veronez charged, leading to the shooting. Another student claimed Veronez once threatened to kill everyone in the class, but his threats were dismissed by the students because of his condition. The student was quoted as saying he was actually like two different people. One minute he could be nice, sweet, helping you out. Another motive for the tragic event was pointed to the bullying Veronez was subjected to for his condition. A civil court awarded the Veronez family a $175,000 settlement for wrongful death, and the school has continued to try and move on from the incident.
Number 2, the Martinsville satanic sex scandal. During the 1980s and 90s, a moral panic swept across the United States with hundreds of cases of alleged sexual abuse in daycares. Many were said to be part of satanic rituals, and soon various communities were finding themselves engulfed in a mass investigation and panic. The small town of Martinsville, Saskatchewan, Canada had one of its own. In 1992, a mother alleged her child had been sexually abused by a local woman who ran a daycare center. As police began an investigation, reports flooded the station with claims of sexual abuse by a satanic cult known as the Brotherhood of the Ram. Soon, dozens of people, including 5 police officers of 3 different detachments, were facing over 100 charges of child molestation and sexual abuse. However, many of these charges were dropped after evidence proved the events had not taken place, but one individual was charged with molestation, albeit not to the same extent of the original charges. After the local detachment became overwhelmed with the cases, an RCMP task force took over the investigation and concluded it was nothing more than mass hysteria, and investigators had mishandled the investigation with leading questions to the witnesses and praising children for giving incriminating answers. The couple who were initially accused of the abuse received a $924,000 settlement in 2004 for emotional and personal damages as a result of the claims. It goes to show just how much a rumor can spread and the drastic effect it can have on the lives of people.
Number 1. The Mecca Girls' School Fire. Saudi Arabia has been known for having a controversial human rights record and a strict religious code known as Sharia law. In the city of Mecca, considered the center of the Islamic world, a major incident caused outcry across the globe. In the early morning of March 11, 2002, a fire broke out at the Mecca Intermediate School number 31. As teachers and children ran for the exits, members of the religious police, or Mutaween, prevented several girls from exiting the building to safety because they were not properly covered, and there was a risk of male emergency personnel coming into contact with them. As a result, 15 girls perished in the fire, 9 of whom were Saudi, and the rest from Chad, Egypt, Guinea, Niger, and Nigeria. While an inquiry found that the Mutaween had in fact not interfered until the situation was under control, witnesses claim they were there in full force and not allowing girls to leave the school. This was not the last incident of such matter. In 2014, a female student at a Saudi university was denied access to proper medical care because the advanced medical assistants were male, thus resulting in her death. As a result of this and the school fire, activists have called for sanctions against Saudi Arabia until they improve their civil rights record. Thank you for watching. Be sure to drop by my channel to watch the second part of Top 15s in My Collaboration, a video on 10 horrifying unsolved deaths. And be sure to subscribe to my channel while you're there, because you won't want to miss what's next. So be sure to check out the link in the description below to watch our next video.